So 1 year ago today, Marvel's Spider-Man was released for the PlayStation 4. Last summer I did a marathon of reviews on my channel where I took a look at every 3D Spider-Man game that have ever been developed, and I reviewed each and every one of them, culminating in an hour-long video review about this game in particular, and I had a lot of good things to say about it.
In the months after the game's release, however, 3 DLC packs were made available to consumers, offering up new stories, characters, missions, and various other goodies for fans of the Webhead to enjoy. They were released under the titles The Heist, Turf Wars, and Silver Lining, and each one has its own small story that all tied together in a narrative called The City That Never Sleeps. I made a couple of videos giving my basic thoughts on the first two when they were released, but due to a long list of reasons I won't get into here, I never made one for the final DLC pack, but at the end of my thoughts on the Turf Wars DLC, I promised to make a full video discussing the entirety of The City That Never Sleeps and giving you my full thoughts on everything it has to offer.
This could have very easily turned into another hour-long review, and I just was not prepped up for that kind of project right now. I honestly thought this review was going to be like 20 minutes tops, so I'm going to be doing things just a little bit differently, mostly because of my schedule. I'm going to be splitting things up into about 3 parts. Part 1 is today, obviously, you're watching it right now, but parts 2 and 3 are not going to be far behind. On Monday, you can expect part 2, and on Wednesday, you can expect part 3. I want to have these together pretty closely. It's mostly going to be plot stuff in the first 2 parts, so if you want to avoid spoilers, I would just wait till Wednesday when we're going to be talking about gameplay and I can speak about the plot in a more general sense, so I'm not giving away too many of the story details for you. But with all of that said, no more delays. Let's get this party started.
Like I mentioned before, the story of The City That Never Sleeps is kind of split into 3 parts. While all 3 DLC packs share a common thread, that being Hammerhead and the Maggia crime families, each DLC focuses more or less on a character connected to Spider-Man who's being affected by Hammerhead shenanigans. The Heist is mostly centered on Black Cat, Turf Wars on Yuri Watanabe, and Silver Lining on Silver Sable. Each DLC pack is like a B-plot that ties together into the larger story, and honestly, I think the setup works rather well. It didn't even dawn on me until I was writing the script for this video, but it actually isn't that far off from how an arc in Spidey's comics would be handled. As a matter of fact, there's a lot about this campaign's writing that reminds me of comics in all the best ways. Each DLC starts with either Mary Jane or Yuri narrating over a bunch of detective-esque notes, briefing us on what's going on in the city at the time. The main threat revolves around the mob, known as the Maggia crime families, as they're trying to take advantage of the power vacuum left in the wake of Kingpin's arrest. This isn't a bad idea, as I don't think something like an old-style mafia would serve as a strong threat for something on the scale of the base game, but it definitely works well for something a little smaller. It also helps retroactively strengthen the impact that Wilson Fisk had on the city. We started off the base game at his downfall, a victorious conclusion to a long string of events that we didn't see in this universe. Now, before you get the wrong idea, that's not a criticism. In fact, I actually really appreciate how much that aspect of the opening for the main game helped establish the universe we were in, the status of Spider-Man within the city, as that can vary a lot depending on the story being told, and was a great way to use a character that every Spider-Man fan is going to be familiar with and enjoy being given a chance to take down. It was a great way to open the game up on a high note while laying the groundwork for the rest of the adventure. Still, while we didn't necessarily need to have more details about Kingpin's influence on the criminal underworld of the Big Apple, as it's something we've been told quite a number of times, it doesn't mean it's not nice to have it there. I've also always enjoyed the ideas of heroes dealing with the conflicts created by their actions, even when they were doing the right thing, which is the kind of story that works for Spider-Man on every conceivable level, since his entire existence needs to be constantly beaten into the ground by the angry fists of destiny. That, and the idea of a darker power rising up as a consequence of a city system that adapted and ran off the corrupt activities of its criminals to challenge the moral standing of the hero who cleaned up the streets, is an idea that has been proven to work more than once. It's absolutely worth stating that this content takes place some time after the main game's campaign, and also references and builds off of a lot of those events, so if you haven't played the main game, I wouldn't recommend playing through these DLCs, or even watching this part of the video, unless you just really don't care about spoilers. That being said, let's take it from the top, shall we? Everything kicks off when MJ calls Peter and tells him that she caught a lead that one of the Maggia Dons is planning to send in some men to steal a painting called the Maria, which is hanging out over at the Museum of Contemporary Art. The Arachnite shows up and takes out the mob members outside before trying to get into the building. He finds what looks like claw marks in a hole that's been cut through the wall, and when he gets inside, the guards are nowhere to be found. Spider-Man wants to find some answers, but can't get into the security room without a guard's handprint. He gets the idea to look around for objects left behind by guards to scan fragments of their handprints until he can manufacture manufacture a complete one, letting him into the security room where he finds the unharmed, tranquilized bodies of the guards. Spidey notices that someone shut off the camera and pointed at the painting, and he decides to check it out. I didn't realize Spidey had such an appreciation for the fine arts. Before he can study the painting and make hackneyed theories about what the color of her hair represents, the Magia very rudely bust in and start patrolling the place, causing security glass to cover the art, and you get some time to take each of them out before they just start trying to steal random artifacts and take off with them. You do some punches, some kicks, insult a couple of people, and bam, the art is safe. Except, you know, it isn't.
I'm gonna have to call you right back.
You look good. Been working out?
Oh boy, guys, it's my favorite character. Alright, to be fair, and I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but I actually really like this version of Black Cat. For one thing, her design is toned down a bit, so she comes off as less of a pinup girl to serve as little more than just eye candy, and for another thing, Spider-Man has no interest in her advances. Like, yeah, she totally tries to flirt with him and everything, but this is a grown-up and mature Peter who's dedicated to his relationship with MJ and doesn't get easily swayed by her advances. Rather than repeating the age-old cycle of Felicia toying with him and making him question himself and all that derivative nonsense, the interactions between the two characters are actually used to inform us on either the strength of their integrity or the inner conflict they deal with. Already, Felicia Hardy is a far more interesting character here than she is in something like Web of Shadows, where it feels like her entire job is to just look hot and act like a teenager.
I was doing it for you, so you would see that we were made for each other.
Thank you, Tech. That was horrible.
Cat breaks open the Maria and steals a thumb drive that was hidden within it, kicking off the real main plot of the DLC, where we see Black Cat, presumably working for Hammerhead, running around stealing USB drives from the other Magia families that are basically the keys to all of their financial assets. Spidey and MJ theorize that Hammerhead is using her to gather the USB drive so he can essentially steal the wealth from all of the other Magia families and take total control as the top crime boss in the city. After catching up with Felicia as she's stealing another drive, the Bug asks her why she would even work for the metal-headed Mafia member, to which she says,
If I don't, they'll kill my son.
Already a bit of a plot twist, but it gets better.
You know that she and I dated for a while.
Yeah, so? Oh, are you serious?
I mean, I don't know for sure, but it's possible.
oh boy. From here, we get a good amount of tracking Black Cat down, even stopping by crime scenes and doing some detective work to find out where she could be headed. You also get to experience the greatest interrogation in history.
All right, I give up.
I love it. A+. You eventually catch up to Kat and convince her that you can help her out. She agrees, and the search for her son begins. Outside of this, there were actually a couple of side missions throughout the DLC that had bits of plot in them too. There's one where an old detective asks for your help in gathering a bunch of paintings that were stolen by the original Black Cat, Felicia's father. You chat with him after gathering every painting and hear him talk about his long investigation on Walter Hardy, and honestly, if you don't put together that this detective is Walter Hardy after one or two conversations, I don't know if I can help you. Of course, Spidey doesn't for some stupid reason. It just doesn't seem to click to him that he's actually helping Hardy collect all of his stolen goods until it's way too late to do anything about it, and at that point, the Webhead really looks like an idiot.
So she steals intellectual property too.
More like improves on it. She's elevated Hardy's work to a whole new level.
Almost sounds like you admire her.
Do this long enough, you can't help noticing real talent.
Spider-Man, how are you not putting this together? You also get a few missions where you have to deal with a returning screwball. Not much happens here story-wise, but yeah, she got out of prison and she's back to cause issues again. You don't get to bust her by the end of the first DLC, so I guess we all know what that means. Finally, there's some well-written phone conversations with Mary Jane and Miles. The convos with MJ usually revolve around the mission at hand, but they also serve to help develop the relationship between her and Peter, as they both have a lot of baggage to sort through. It's good stuff, and it's the sort of thing that I think the two characters needed after getting back together. Sometimes what you really need to strengthen a good relationship is some good old-fashioned conflict to work through together, and they do that well. Lastly are the conversations with Miles, who's trying to adapt to his new spider powers. He's really desperate to take up the Spider-Man mantle and tries a little too hard to convince Peter to take him on patrol. Normally, I feel like this kind of thing would annoy me, but I actually find it a little charming. It's also a very obvious lampshade on how Peter thinks he might have a son with Felicia, and all the while is sort of fathering a young man who really needs his help. I think the conversation I was the most pleased with was this.
Keep it believable. Don't do anything too flashy.
Like what?
Well, no dunking, obviously.
Oh, right. Of course.
Miles?
It was just once, and the dude was talking trash. It was so perfect, I wish you'd have been there.
Miles?
I won't do it again. I promise. As long as you agree to start training me.
Let me think about it.
Cool. Okay, homework time, gotta go.
The comics have had a tough time making Miles stand out as his own character, set apart from Peter. Though the more recent comics have been better about that, and the issue was not present at all in what is now the best Spider-Man movie of all time. After Peter Parker's death in the Ultimate Comics, I thought it was neat that they were handing the mantle to a brand new character, only to be disappointed that he really doesn't stand out as his own individual all that much. I think a point that really proves this is how Tom Holland's Spider-Man has taken way more from Miles' backstory than Peter Parker's, and very few people seem to have noticed. Shout out to Godzilla Mendoza for that little breakthrough. But this conversation highlights that Miles really does have some differences, and his priorities and motivations don't quite match up with Peter's yet, but that, in my opinion, doesn't make him any less worthy of the mask. Overall, I'd call his characterization a success so far. And then, of course, it's time for pizza. Okay, real talk. Superhero work has gotta be hard, and you're gonna work up a bit of an appetite swinging around the city all the time. When I first saw this, it honestly felt for a second like it was starting to drive elements of the DLC to be a little too meme-driven, but this is the last time anything like this happens, so I don't have as much of a problem with that as I thought I would. Sadly though, while Spider-Man is busy with pizza time, MJ is looking for clues, giving us another one of those wonderful stealth sections everyone was so fond of in the main game. I'll talk more about this in the gameplay section of the video. Between Mary Jane sleuthing and the combined efforts of Spider-Man and Black Cat, the team tracks down a warehouse where Hammerhead is keeping an awful lot of important stuff, including a ton of stolen gear that was left behind by Sable International. You know, I really like that as a plot point. In the main game, we spent a lot of time busting up Sable checkpoints to keep them from terrorizing civilians, and locations were often left in a bit of a mess. So this is yet another good example of establishing some consequences to doing the right thing. In a way, it keeps the protagonist involved with all future events, as everything that's happening or that they're trying to prevent is in one way or another a result of their own actions, which I believe makes for some pretty compelling storytelling. After knocking the tar out of Hammerhead's goons, you and Cat finally make it up to the vault where he's keeping Felicia's son, and why is Felicia's son not here? Oh no.
The kidnapping? Your son? That was all just a lie?
Lie is such an ugly word. I prefer misdirection.
Yeah, Felicia doesn't have a son. Never did.
They played us like a damn fiddle!
I was actually expecting for her to have a kid, but for it to just not be Peter's or something, but I actually find this twist a lot cooler. Black Cat is so sunken into her ways that she used the kind-hearted nature of someone I really do believe she cares about so she could collect the wealth of the entire Magia, all the while pitting the families of the mob against each other. Mad respect to Felicia for impressing me with her complexity, and even madder respect to Insomniac for actually making me like Black Cat. Of course, the fact that she just screwed over the head of the mob doesn't exactly spell out positive vibes for her, but despite Peter's warnings that her life is in danger, press F in the chat to pay by Felicia's. The credits roll after an ominous shot of the Big Bad himself, and then a post-credit scene plays where we see Peter lament over being played and lied to, and not having a son after working really hard to come to terms with it. Oh, right, and having an ex-lover die.
Do you think she survived?
I don't know. I mean, anything's possible, but...
Yeah, no, don't give me that. I saw that explosion. She was in that fire. Don't you try to backpedal out of that one, game. The heist was a good start, but I remember the cliffhanger at the end feeling a little cheap, even if it doesn't really bother me now. The best thing I can say about it story-wise is that it took a character I've never been very fond of and not only made her interesting, but made me want to see more of her. Bravo, Insomniac. What you got for us next?
Thank you for playing. Would you like to try again? Special thanks to our top tier patrons, Patricia Marcoux and Christine Larkin.